Thanks, everyone, for being here, whether you're here in person or online. Appreciate it very much. This is yet another round of listening sessions around the long-term investment strategy. My name is Tom Byler. I'm the director at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I want to welcome you. We have a number of slides that we want to walk you through. That's not the one that I want to start with. But it does signal something that I'm going to try to do, and it's hard for me, and so Lori has promised to help me, is that I'm going to try to go as fast as possible through this background stuff, and really because we want to concentrate our time hearing from you and having a dialogue with you. The purpose of these sessions is to give you a sense of our thinking, but even more importantly, to get a sense from you as folks who are familiar with our program, who have benefited from it or worked with it in one fashion or another. We want to hear from you as we go through this. Some quick introductions at the outset, just of OWEB staff and board member. Morgan Ryder with our board is here today. We're glad to have her with us. Also just wanted to recognize Greg Sieglitz, Kathy Leopold, Carolyn Devine, Lori Onnen, Meta Lofsgarden, and also our facilitators who are going to be helping us today, Robin Gumpert and Emily Plummer. So we can go to the next slide, I think. Oh, yes. Why don't we do, so if we can just quickly go around the room and do brief introductions. Folks online don't have to do that, but the folks in the room do. So please introduce yourself.
Dale Buck, retired Tillamook dairy farmer.
Alex Sifford, stuck in Esco Watershed. John Pampers, Western Basin Plant Alliance.
Liz Redon, North Hampton Watershed Council.
Larry Sick, Mackenzie Watershed.
Michelle Bailey, Columbia River Forest Council.
Keep going.
Chris Hathaway of Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership.
Jerry Nick Gillespie, OECD. Bruce Taylor, Defenders of Wildlife, and the Oregon Habitat Conservation.
And I'm Maida with OWEB.
And we've introduced, well, staff. Yeah. Nope, we'll get Ryan. All right. I think we've covered everybody. So this is the agenda for today. In addition to the opening remarks that we're now in progress, we're going to walk you through the process and timeline. We're going to walk you through, again, very briefly, the proposal that has been out there since December, and then spend the bulk of our time in breakout group discussions with some report back. For those of you who have sat through our listening sessions in the past, this model, I think, is going to look pretty familiar. Then we'll talk about next steps at the end. So, why are we doing this? Just briefly, the main reason is the passage of Measure 76 and permanent funding. And it really created the opportunity and frankly, the responsibility for us at OWEB, for our board, and for our staff take a look at our programs and across the board, but including, and that's where this discussion focuses on, is the conservation investment priorities of the board. This is the right time for us to be doing this in light of us now being on permanent funding versus the time-limited funding that we had prior to the passage of Measure 76. In addition, I think this exercise is extremely important for us as an agency to gather and focus on our priorities as an investor in conservation grants. And that is important as we look ahead based on budgeting forecasts in the future. The lottery funds look to be flattening out. They're not on that steady, dramatic increase that we experienced in the 2000s for about 6 years, where it was just a very steep increase. We now look like we're going to have pretty steady, which is good, but not increasing funding from our main primary source. And then we also are looking to get our board to be thinking a little bit differently about how we invest, not focused necessarily on the types of grants as we've described our program and kind of operated our program in the past, but thinking about the broader investment areas. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Morgan, and she's just going to say a few words, and we'll keep going.
Excellent. Well, my main reason for speaking and having been handed a script 2 minutes ago, I really just want to thank you all for coming today and let you know that we really, really value your opinion and your input, and we take it very seriously. How many of you came to the first listening session? Anyone? A couple of people. So what we did after that session was our facilitators went and compiled all of the comments and developed a report for the board. And we had a retreat in July, and we spent quite a bit of time going through the comments and through history of all of the different watershed councils and through OWEB, because we really want to take that into account, and going forward, it's really important. And we just want to, again, thank you and recognize the past accomplishments and make sure that we continue to be as effective going forward. Something else that's important is listening to you as a board. We don't want to be looking in a mirror trying to figure out where to go. We want to be looking out the window, and that's where you guys all come in, and we're going to be hearing from you today. So again, really appreciate you being here, and thanks for everything you do. Because my talking points I probably should have looked at. Direction's not final, and details will be developed based on the input today.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about process, but before I do that, I'm going to quickly focus on the guiding principles for development of a long-term investment strategy. These were developed by the board in a couple of retreats, and they're really important. And they're also on your handout on the back of the folded 4-pager, but I just wanted to touch on the first bullet. That's really important to the board, that they recognize all of the good work that's already happened. There's significant accomplishments based on the work of OWEB's partners, and we want to build on that. And we want to phase in changes because obviously we know that a lot of good has happened, and we want to keep the good going. And I briefly wanted to talk about the handouts that you have. So you've got a packet of materials. The first one is the agenda itself. The second page is kind of a process timeline. And we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. That's just for your information. The third page is the folded 4-page proposal. And that's what, you may want to have that handy as Tom goes through his slides later so you can see. It's got more details than he'll be talking about, so if you have any clarifying questions as he goes through it, you might want to ask then. And then at the back of that, there's a blue paper with the questions that we're going to have in the breakout groups. And then the green paper is the evaluation form that we hope you will turn in to us so we can continue to improve how we do our meetings. Quickly talking about the process and timeline. So there's a long piece of paper over here, and it's really talking about this entire long-term investment strategy. We started in about a year ago with the board kicking it off. We started with listening sessions, which a lot of you attended. And then we did, as Morgan said, we had a couple retreats. The board's proposed direction, which is the board's idea that we want your feedback on, was released at the end of last year, and now we've got these listening sessions. The board's going to meet in March. There'll be a chance for public comment at that time also. And then the board plans to adopt the direction for the investment strategy in June. And then, and this is where there's still a lot done. That's not the end, that's the beginning of details. So depending on what the board does, there will be a lot of implementation details that we'll be working on, and that we'll also be working with our partners on. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Tom.
All right, the next is, this is one of my favorite slides, because the title of the slide makes me feel like I'm in a political science class somewhere. Oh, wait, yeah, there we go. Yeah, no, back. There we go. Elevations of influence. Does that make you want to fall asleep in a college class? But this is a really important slide because it gives you a visual image of all the moving parts and kind of where we are sitting in terms of the conversation that we're having today and have been having for the last year with the board. And on the left-hand column, just briefly, you'll see that the key drivers and influences of our program. And at the top is the law, Constitution, statutes, rules, the sideboards around federal funds that we receive. Those create a framework for us in terms of what we do. More broadly, our mission statement is another filter that we use. Our strategic plan of 2010, completed right as Measure 76 was passed, still holds true and is still one of the drivers and again the filters that we look at as we have these conversations. And then you see with the jumbo jet there, the long-term investment strategy. That's the elevation we're flying at today. And this is in between the strategic plan and the goals of our strategic plan and what we do every 2 years after our budget is approved by the legislature is our spending plan. So again, we're not reinventing our strategic plan. We're not talking about the level of detail of our spending plan. This is kind of the in-between area, and it's an important one for us, and I think it's going to help us be more strategic with our prioritization and funding decisions as we move forward. On the right-hand side, just quickly, is just to give you a sense of the different drivers out there outside of our program, the different planning documents, priorities, different issue drivers that feed into what we do. It's a constant mix of adaptive management for us as we implement our program. So again, the 2010 strategic plan, we are. This is just a recap, I guess, of what I just said. The long-term investment strategy, we're moving toward a decision point by the board in June of this year, really around this elevation of decision, which is a direction for us in terms of how we move forward. There are a lot of details that will unfold after that. The first piece will be our spending plan, which we will begin talking about very soon with our board, but decisions are likely to start being made around the spending plan at the same time in June of 2013. So what does the long-term investment strategy look like? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're moving away from talking about our program around the notion of technical assistance grants, restoration grants, acquisition grants as program areas. Those still are critical components of what we do. They are grant types, but we tried to look at this from a different vantage point. And our board has established a framework that has 3 key areas for us in terms of their investments. One is operating capacity, councils and districts primarily. One is the grant-making approach that we call open solicitation. And listed here you see the different types of current grant programs that fall into that area. And the idea here is that these are relatively open-ended solicitations that react to applications that come in from different parts of the state. And a regular grant program is for those of you who are frequent flyers with us, is probably what you'll think of when we talk about open solicitation. And then the third area is also an area that has a number of programs that are existing and have been ongoing for some time, is around focused investments. And those are a little bit different in that they have some specific outcomes in mind, sometimes tied to specific partnership and geography, and therefore are fundamentally different than the open solicitation approach. So when we came out with our draft proposal around the long-term investment strategy in December, what you saw were some recommendations on these 3 framework areas, these 3 pillars. And on operating capacity, we are recommending that in this proposal that we continue this investment. It's extremely important for us. As most of you, if not all of you know, we're a relatively tiny agency. We have 30 FTE. We are not staffed on the ground to do the kind of work that we rely on from the local infrastructure that is built up around this program. It's primarily councils, watershed councils, and soil and water conservation districts. They are the ones who develop their relationships with landowners across the state. They're the ones who develop project proposals. They're the ones who put applications into our program and ultimately implement projects. Critical aspect of the success of our program is to be able to maintain that infrastructure around the state. I'll leave it at that. We'll just keep moving here. So Focus investments, we want to, our proposal is to continue those program areas. Key piece here, though, is that there's also a recommendation that we phase in a gradual increase to these programs. As one of the things that, that we see as a real advantage to this program area, or to this framework area, is, and especially from a public entity, from a public agency like OWEB, we have demands to be accountable. And the accountability that is asked of us, whether it's from the governor or from state legislators or the federal government, is to be able to show a return on our investment. And what is becoming increasingly clear to me is that having as part of our investment portfolio a series of investments where we concentrate our resources with other funding partners in these focused investment approaches allows us a chance to accelerate the work on the ground. And if we do it right, be able to track that and monitor that and report on that in a meaningful way. That's not to say that the open solicitation approach doesn't achieve those outcomes. The problem, or not the problem, but the caveat to that is that we don't know when we'll see that endpoint. And when we have the responsibility to be able to report to the public on these investments, having the ability to be able to use this approach, I think, is going to be very advantageous from an OWEB standpoint, not to mention in terms of the outcomes that we'll see on the ground. So we can keep going on, please. So open solicitation, we want to continue this approach as well. One of the ideas that we have put forward, though, is that, and one of the messages we've heard a lot from folks in previous conversations, is a concern about whether we'll have enough funding in this area over time. And we can't guarantee how much funding we'll have in any of these areas over time, but folks are ultimately concerned and interested in the opportunity to be able to compete over these dollars. And so one idea that we've put forward is to redesign this program and really look at it from a kind of a small, medium, and large approach. One idea would be to expand our small grant program beyond what it does now. And we don't have a specific notion on that, and we're interested in hearing from you, but the idea would be to potentially either put more money into that program for the current uses, which are on the ground type of work, or to perhaps expand the types of uses. Maybe they're making eligible, for example, small grants for outreach types of activities, or even technical assistance. Again, we don't have specifics on that, but we want to tee up that conversation. The other piece involves kind of the mid-size and large grants. And the notion here is that we've seen in our history that at times, and I think this will increase over time, our applicants are getting more and more sophisticated. They are getting better at what they do. And one of the consequences of that is we're seeing projects come in that are very large scale, individual projects that are very large scale with a pretty big price tag attached to them in terms of the grant. At times, we've seen in different regions under our open solicitation approach, a grant that will come in for $1 million or more, and it'll rank very high on the list through our review team process. The net impact of that is that we can fund very few projects that warrant funding that come in below that. That has created a lot of angst within our own staff around that, because we see a lot of projects that are good that would otherwise be funded if that big project wasn't out there, kind of eclipsing all the funds. So what do we do? The idea here is maybe let's put a cap on for mid-size and create kind of a mid-size grant opportunity. I don't have a magic number in terms of what that cap would be, but the idea essentially is to not have a $1 million plus grant application competing against a $70,000 grant application, which is a scenario that plays out today. So if we do put a cap on and create some mid-size grant opportunity, what do we do about those big ones? Because they are good projects. We don't want to exclude those. We don't want to miss those opportunities if they present themselves. Well, the thought here is to create a separate solicitation around that focuses just on those larger grants, and perhaps maybe even have them compete against each other on a statewide level rather than regionally. So again, ideas that we're putting out there. The real background on this piece, though, is to try to create more opportunity for folks in different parts of the state. So another big area for us that that not only is important for our board, increasingly important for our board, and I've alluded to it already in some of my comments about our accountability and being able to just show our return on the investment that we make. We're still a relatively young program. As a state agency, we started in 1999, and I can tell you that the first few years were all about just showing folks that we could get projects on the ground. And that was our reality back then. We then evolved, and now got to a point where we could show the outputs, where the dollars were going, what types of projects, where, and that's good too. We need to be able to demonstrate that and be able to account for that. What we need to do better, though, and where we're making good progress, but we need to do better and put more resources behind, is being able to account for outcomes at a larger than just a single project scale. And so that is an area of interest with the board, and it's an area that could be pursued through both focused investments and open solicitations potentially, but that's a point that we could talk about today. Emerging issues. This is a bit nuanced for some folks potentially. I can tell you that over the time I've been at OWEB, we have had proposals come to us that have kind of seemingly come out of nowhere at times, or come to us at times that don't fit exactly in our open solicitation regular grant program, but are high priorities for the governor, for example. And we've entertained those proposals sometimes by themselves and in a relatively ad hoc fashion, because we didn't have a process for reviewing those types of proposals or any kind of competitive way to approach those. The idea here is we know that this is just kind of the political reality. We're going to see proposals come to us that aren't going to fit within our different programs that we already have in play. We know that there may be emergency needs that come up, like during the shutdown of the fishing season on the coast. We helped create a jobs program on the coastal areas for fishers who were out of work. Those types of things I think will come up now and then. We can't predict, but this idea would be to create a more structure around this so that we've got a more formal process, which frankly I think is good government and something that is long overdue for us, and would give folks a clearer sense of what funds are available and what process they need to go through in order to be able to achieve those or to receive that funding down the line. Okay, I'm going to pass so thank you folks. If you have questions, if you can hold on to those, we can probably address many of those when we get into the breakout groups. And so Lori's going to take us on the next step.
Right, thank you, Tom. And there is time for any clarifying questions on any of the slides, but there should be plenty of time in the breakout groups. So what I'm going to, we're actually at that moment where we can break into the small groups, and I think we're going to do 2. Are we still at the level of 2? So first thing to do is look at your package of things, and you have a little card. It's either pink or blue or green or yellow. And we're going to do a group. If you're a blue or a yellow, you're going to be starting on this half of the room. And if you're pink or green, you're going to be starting on that half of the room. And there will be, each of you will get to talk to each set of questions, and we have a facilitator that will help facilitate the dialogue. We definitely want to listen and hear what you have to say. We've got some questions that we proposed to maybe help start the discussion. What I would also say is if you feel more comfortable writing things to us, you can do that. Write it down on the blue sheet and hand it in. There's also going to be a Survey Monkey available after the last listening session next week. open for 2 weeks because some people can't make these or they couldn't make the webinar. So we're trying to get as many tools to get feedback as possible. You can certainly always do emails too, but just spread the word because we definitely want as much feedback as we can get.
All right, so we'll just jump into this. We've got 3 questions that we're trying to glean a little bit more information. But generally the concept here is, as Tom described, to continue with effectiveness monitoring as a core part of our program, to specifically embed that in all of our focused investment areas, where presently that's not an obligation for all of those. That would be one theme as part of this investment strategy. And another piece of this would be to allow effectiveness monitoring through our open solicitations as we do now, but rather than have that be wide open, any type at any time, that the board would give some sort of targets and direction contemplated for what sort of solicitation we have around that. So those are some key themes around it. And then within that, we're wanting to talk with you about these questions about what sort of criteria we should use as a board. Your ideas about effectively transmitting that information out, sharing information about that, and then are there things that you just see as missing that you don't have covered?
So can you define effectiveness?
Okay, I can try, and you guys can help. So I'll tell you what we've done so far. Our effectiveness monitoring program has generally been focused almost exclusively on restoration activity. It's not the effectiveness of technical assistance or outreach or even council support, but it's more about restoration, watershed restoration. So we've been focused on things like, our largest investment area has been on riparian restoration as an area. The idea has been to evaluate how effective has that been. Do we have now areas where trees are growing? Has it been successful? Are areas protected from livestock, elk, and other damages? That sort of thing. Is that helpful?
Yeah, but I mean, there's any water quality monitoring or wildlife habitat monitoring or anything. I mean, effectiveness, I assume, is more than just having trees.
Yes, it would be. And so I think the difference between effectiveness monitoring and what you just described is the things you talked about, people in the field talk about that as status and trends. What's the status of the wildlife habitat? What's the status of the water quality? How does that change over time? Effectiveness monitoring is focused primarily on the effectiveness of actions taken. How effective were your actions? So that's why we're focused on that.
You're talking about more programmatic things rather than specific. The effectiveness of specific projects, though, right?
I think that's an important piece of this conversation we want to have with you, because we have done both as an organization.
And are you weighing that with monetary effectiveness per dollar spent?
We've not done that to date so much, and that would be a little different for us. That would be more of a cost benefit, I think. Right. But yeah, this has primarily been on the ecological outcomes. So.
Repeat your question. I didn't hear it.
Whether they were looking at cost benefit, comparing, spending X dollars here as opposed to X dollars there, where do you get the most benefit?
Okay. All right. So hopefully that's some good grounding to get us started. So we can dig right into question 1 perhaps to get us started, or wherever you guys want to take this. But in terms of when you think about effectiveness monitoring, are there certain criteria that we should be thinking about as a board? Do you want to make any statements about the overall theme of effectiveness monitoring and focus investments and others? No? Okay. Not yet.
I guess I would say that one of the critical things would be the cost benefit analysis, which that criteria should be in there for the effectiveness.
So you'd like to see that as part of an
like
effectiveness.
To see that.
Okay. All right. Good. That's good. Good addition. Not something we thought about.
We're just talking about the effectiveness monitoring for focused investments in this conversation, not effectiveness monitoring for the general grant
No,
program
I think we want to do both. Okay. There's one theme in this around using effectiveness monitoring in focused investments. That's kind of a key strategy here, but it's not limited to that in this conversation. So anything you want to say about any of that, we want to capture.
One curiosity I have is that does effectiveness monitoring have to occur on all of the projects of a similar project type? You know, or can we streamline the process or be strategic in the process or efficient and select, you know, a few project types and conduct the effectiveness monitoring there and then share the results?
And so do you have any preferences or guidance you'd like to give us, or you want to just kind of throw that out for conversation?
I guess that, I mean, if I were to give guidance, I would pursue whether you could do that and still get the same information that's valuable to the agency, and then how to share that.
Okay, good. And anyone can piggyback on things too. And so I think a key theme here is what I'll call maybe bundling of project activities or project types.
Correct.
And
so if 20 organizations are conducting channel complexity projects in similar geography or terrain, do we all need to conduct effectiveness monitoring on those 20 projects, or can we pick a select few, monitor, you know, the effectiveness or the impact of our restoration actions, and then share that information with, you know, the rest of the group?
Okay, good. So stratifying across geographies as well as types of activities. And then another key point you made was sharing that information across organizations and where it's relevant.
Correct.
Okay. Good.
I think the benefit of that would be, you know, savings, the cost savings.
Yeah, there's kind of an implied efficiency and cost savings there.
But you're, time-wise, like, we've had a lot of trees planted in Tillamook County along small streams, but it's going to be 50 years before they ever shade those streams.
Okay, good point.
So, I mean, you're not going to get an answer in 10 years.
So it sounds like what you're saying is align your monitoring and your expectations with those outcomes that you're trying to achieve with these activities?
You need to make sure those trees are growing, and you know, even though it's going to take longer.
Okay, so don't wait 50 years to do your monitoring, because you need to
No,
have
you
an
need to
incremental,
start,
but be sure to focus your, on the outcomes.
I have some cedar trees already that are 14 feet tall, but the river's already washed 2 of them out.
Yeah,
And, you know,
It sounds like almost like an effectiveness monitoring plan or program would be good to determine once you have the project when to start monitoring along the way and where to monitor and how to do it strategically.
does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I think,
plan and program
I think, yeah,
notion?
I mean, it goes back to
Closer?
what I guess
Okay.
Eve was saying too, though. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to expect every restoration project to have its own effectiveness monitoring program, and I don't think the partners have the capacity to do that, to monitor a lot of projects for 5 or 10 or 15 years, and certainly you guys don't really want to pay for all of that either, because it's really expensive. So it is about kind of like finding the types of projects or key projects that are representative of broader project types and maybe focusing investment on those.
It's not like a lot of the monitoring has to be particularly,
It's not that a lot of the monitoring has to be particularly expensive either. I mean, a lot of that should be pretty simple. You go out and you look at it. I mean, that doesn't cost much. People should be going out to those places anyway.
Yeah, good. Let's hold on that point just a minute, because I want to make sure we captured your other one. Outcomes, time frame, and location. You got the representative piece. There was another thing that you mentioned, though, about not everyone needs to do it. So it kind of fits into Morgan's comment around kind of a plan and a program approach. So I want to make sure that we get that, develop the program approach.
It would be great
plan,
if everybody could, but I
but
don't think it's realistic.
just reasonably, you can't do that. And so a program or plan more broadly, and then enlist others to participate in that, but not everyone has to do it everywhere all the time, is kind of the theme, right?
but getting back to the cost, like Alex's Watershed Council, I mean, they drive by those plantings regularly, and you know, that you can keep track of, are the trees still growing, and even though it's going to take a long time. So I agree with Peter. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we captured that point too. So there's
Well-
kind of a tiered approach, it sounds like, to this effectiveness monitoring, where some can be fairly low level, fairly inexpensive. That might be a model for some things.
Every year, multiple times a year by people with projects. I mean, they should be monitoring.
Okay. It sounds to me like that could fit back to this program and plan approach. You could structure it so that it had those different elements and responsibilities and timeframes. Does that work for you guys?
I think the cost is going to vary depending upon the project type and the scale of the project. If you want robust data sets, then it's going to cost more. If it's a complex, large-scale project, it's going to cost more. If it's a tree planting, you can get it to a low cost. So it really depends on scale and complexity, scope and scale.
Sliding scale of scope and complexity.
Yeah, there's a big difference between monitoring for vegetation survival and monitoring for fish presence, for example.
The different parameters and outcomes you're measuring. Good.
Can you say more about that, or?
I've been teed up to say more about that. So, yeah, so implementation monitoring from the technical standpoint is some of what we've been talking about here. If you did a tree planting project, you went out and monitored that the trees were planted and that they're there. The effectiveness monitoring might kick in if you're starting to measure whether you've reduced the amount of sediment that's going into the stream, which was one reason you planted the trees. The diversity of tree species and other plants that might be in that area, that riparian area, is that starting to take shape? And as you mentioned earlier, are you ultimately getting some shade benefit from those trees over kind of the long term? Those would be more the effectiveness monitoring, kind of focused on the outcomes. The implementation monitoring is really focused on the implementation activities and did those get accomplished successfully. So that's a kind of a technical thing between those two. So we are primarily talking about the latter, about the outcomes, about those that Tom mentioned, kind of the big picture accomplishments. Others that haven't spoken up yet on this topic? Anything to throw out there? How about the effectively sharing our effectiveness monitoring? That's a good one. We're all about effectiveness. What you have any ideas about that? What are some of our some of the methods or approaches we should take? Is that something that resonates with you?
This might go back to A little bit, but just throw it out in terms of, I think there are a lot of, and maybe OWEB's already starting to do this, and I know there's been a lot of different people doing research on like the best way to control reed canary grass and get a reforestation in a reed canary grass infested area. It'd be great if some of this effectiveness monitoring could be tied to some of those kind of key research questions that everybody is struggling with kind of throughout the state, and help inform, how we move forward with restoration, what OWEB would like to see when you're going back into a reed canary grass infested area. What do you guys look for? What do you want to see in terms of a plan to reforest that area?
So you're talking about effectiveness of the methods used.
Yeah. I mean, so maybe there's like a little bit of a research bent to some of that, but.
Okay. And so maybe add the effectiveness of methods used. I like that. Kind of helps capture that.
For some key, challenges that everybody's facing. Yeah.
Key challenges.
So
Don't let the mic be a deterrent to you talking. It is a little awkward, but
this is very intimidating.
I know, isn't it? Yeah.
Forgot what I was saying. I think one thing that's coming to light is that there are different types of monitoring or effectiveness monitoring. So just clearly defining, the different types.
So are you giving us kind of guidance, do that, OWEB, kind of project that out, provide some clarity about the effectiveness monitoring types, post it on the website, get that out to folks that it's helpful? Is that?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that would be a good solution. Like, you have monitoring tied to research questions, monitoring tied to implementation, monitoring tied to effectiveness, monitoring, so methods. And so just, looking at the different categories and putting it back out for comments so that you can hear back from folks and also cover these important elements.
Okay, others? Any comments on the overarching themes here that are embedded in this? The idea of having effectiveness monitoring within focused investments, and the idea of some amount of effectiveness monitoring through these open solicitation, what we call our regular grant program, with some board guidance or target set for those. Any comments from you guys on that? Does it seem like a good thing to do? Is there some other ways to think about it? And if you're struggling with our categories, so some of this is new, part of the long-term investment strategy, our open solicitation would be what we typically think of as our regular grant program, our regular restoration grants. The focus investments would be things like the strategic special investment partnership, the whole watershed restoration initiative, and things like that. Okay, good.
Yeah, my only thought was sticking with the criteria is to not spend more on monitoring than you spent on the project. And I say that very seriously. The tree planting is an easy one, and we do monitor for 2 or 3 years, especially to see tree growth and go in and replant. After that, though, it's very spotty because no one pays us to go out there every year and monitor. So my suggestion is that drawing on the idea of taking a sample, is that OWEB would propose that every 20th of a like project in a like region would be selected for effectiveness monitoring, and that you would dictate the budget to do so, because the sky's the limit on what you would propose to do, and I think that you need some experienced effectiveness monitoring folks to dictate, well, let's do this, it's the most cost effective.
Good. That's an interesting thought. Any comments or ideas about that notion? That's an interesting one. That we'd be more proactive as an agency about that sequencing and selecting.
I mean, I think that could work really well. I mean, the other thing about effectiveness monitoring that this conversation has brought up, though, is that you really need some pretty good baseline monitoring in a lot of cases to make the effectiveness monitoring work. So you can't just go out necessarily and. It's a lot better if you have some baseline information, you do the project, then you go back and assess how well you did against your project goals. It's a lot harder if you don't have any information there to begin with.
Okay, great. Let's capture that baseline, the importance of baseline monitoring. And then we're getting close in time where we're going to have to move, so anyone else that hasn't provided anything yet, go ahead and chime in so we can be sure to get that.
Although you had the mic first. So this is kind of a basic monitoring comment that you always hear, but it occurs to me that it'd be good to put it on the paper just to be clear what your questions are starting out. Are we monitoring to understand, did we spend the money well? Are we monitoring to find out we increased shade? Did we increase fish? Just make sure that the questions are clear, and I think you could fill in how you would answer those a little bit easier. And then the other thing I was just going to comment is on B, we haven't really tackled that at all, and you've been trying to get us to. So my follow-up question is, who's the audience that you're wanting us to address when we talk about effectively sharing effectiveness monitoring data? Is it between grantees? Is it back to grantee to OWEB? Is it the broader community?
I think it's a great question, and I think what we'd like to get is your input on that. So if I was to turn that into a statement, I'd say, OWEB, be clear, if you're going to do this, who your audience is. And so I'm interpolating here, but maybe you're saying you might have multiple audiences, OWEB, but you might need different methods and approaches to reach those different audiences. So kind of be clear about that if you're going to be providing information outwardly about effectiveness monitoring results. Does that work for you?
I think that's why we haven't said anything
yet about that particular one is that we're not sure who the audience is that we're supposed to be brainstorming around.
So capture that.
Not might, but there are different audiences, so
Yes.
maybe looking at, you know, who OWEB wants, who we want our audience to be.
Okay.
Looking at who we want, as partners, want our audience to be, you know, to receive the results, you know, would be a good clarifying point. A question, not on B. In general, I like the idea of having effectiveness monitoring across the different investments, but if you, my curiosity is if you're pulling money, where's the money going to be pulled from? Are you going to pull it out of, you know, project implementation to funnel into monitoring, or, you know, as you shift priorities around, the shifting of funds available will occur as well. So my curiosity is, where will you pull from?
The mic. Not you. We won't pull it from you. So I think what's really guiding all of this conversation, as Tom showed in that one slide, the relationship of the long-term investment strategy to a spending plan conversation, is that what comes from this would inform that, so that if this was a priority area and we get resonance with all of you and our board and we adopt something like this, that then in a spending plan discussion there would be money set aside within that, so that that would be the place that those funds would come from, and it wouldn't be then coming from another type of activity to fund it, because we will have thought about it in advance, and that would be our budget. So that's, if that's helpful. I think it's a timing conversation. And as we operate now, the board sets aside funding at the beginning of the biennium in their spending plan, may make adjustments over time, but that's trying to set the stage for how funding will be distributed over the life of the biennium. So I think in this case, we try to do that with effectiveness monitoring, set aside money for it. So you'd be transparent, you'd be clear, where is that coming from? Is that helpful? You had one more, and we probably do need to move on because we got the time limit.
You know, the whole idea of monitoring is to learn what you're doing is having the desired effects and help you do a better job in the future, a more cost-effective job in the future. And you know, and skimping on monitoring just to put dollars into projects. I don't think monitoring has to cost a lot of money, but it needs done. And you know, he talked about a 1 in 20 sample size, which to me seems a little bit small and could miss a lot. I don't think they all necessarily have to, and there may be a certain percentage get one level of monitor. They all get some, and a certain percentage of them get a higher detail.
So without getting too deep, what I hear you saying is you're supportive of monitoring. That should be a core part of what's done. Make sure you do it in a way that you're going to be successful,
And that we
not
learn,
an afterthought.
learn how to do it better.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So I'm relatively new to this discussion, but one of the things that I'm thinking to myself as I listen to what you guys are saying is I'm thinking about partners. You know, who is going to help get this done? Is it going to be universities? Is it going to be agencies? Some combination? And so then the question I have is OWEB looking to potential applicants to develop those partnerships and bring those groups in, or is OWEB going to have some part in that process?
Good. Great
So.
addition. The importance of partnerships, seek them, and go broad. I mean,
who has the responsibility? You know, is it on the applicant or is it on OWEB?
okay, good. That's another good one. So another good one for the board to think about is what role should OWEB play in creating those partnerships up front, as opposed to, you know, applicants doing that on their own, or maybe both, but recognizing that those are both important. Okay, excellent.
And I would make one correction to what she wrote up there. That cost-benefit analysis of monitoring. It was on the top, the first one there. It really should be cost-benefit analysis of methods and types of projects.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
And please, if I write something that doesn't capture what you were meaning to say, let me know. Methods of, sorry.
Methods and types of projects.
Good. All right, so we do need to move on to the next question to make sure we have time for that. Be sure to provide, there will be an opportunity for you to provide information through a SurveyMonkey too, so don't feel like this is the last opportunity for you to provide input. If you think of things later today or afterward, go ahead and get them to us. So we are going to move you to the other side of the room and get the juices flowing for another question. Well, we're gonna dive into another question now that's really quite different, and Tom mentioned this during his part of the presentation earlier. And it's in some ways it's a new area. We're calling this right now a competitive offering for emerging issues, and it's an area that we have provided funding in the past in some examples. He mentioned the salmon emergency grants from several years ago for the coastal salmon closure on coho salmon fishing. He mentioned some of the governor's priorities, things like forest health, salmon strongholds, things like that. We've had examples of information technology work that's been done, Oregon Explorer through OSU, GIS and mapping things. So it's kind of a catch-all, so it's kind of challenging to think about. But the idea here is, rather than have those just kind of come at us and use a variety of means and timelines and materials, is to try to structure a process around those so it's more clear to everybody, those that are interested in this work, those that just want to know about it, but that there's some more consistency with the rest of OWEB's programs. And so that's kind of the notion behind it. So I think we want to dive into some of your concepts around the benefits and consequences from this. Again, criteria, like in the last question, process we should use for proposals, and then anything that you see as missing.
Are these costly issues?
So the question was, are they costly? They can be. Some have been in the multi-million-dollar range. Some have been in the tens of thousands or $100,000 range.
So these aren't just limited to projects or programs with ecological consequences. It could be anything.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So yeah, think beyond the restoration angle, but even as one of the examples here is short-term assistance for planning. One example we had last night was an integrated water resource strategy and a need for local planning around that. That might be an area of statewide significance and emerging issue. So yeah, it could be quite broad. So any comments about kind of the need for doing this? Is that?
I'll dive in since no one else is talking.
Cool.
So I think having a process for this, since there hasn't been one in the past, is obviously a great benefit because it creates transparency. And whenever there's transparency, the rest of us can better understand where funding is going and maybe where we could help plug in too as partners of OWEB. So I think that would be great. I also think it's important to have this category. I know sometimes when we start thinking about how expensive it can get and vague it can be, I think this category offers opportunity for innovation for things that maybe those of us on the ground don't have time to think about or don't know the opportunities there. And so I still think it's important to pursue these in general so that you can see what else we can do with this whole Oregon plan idea that we have going on.
Excuse me for reaching. My comment is another level up from this, and as it would have been in the last session. It's hard to argue for or against any of these ideas for me, because they sound like they would be good opportunities and good things to do. But if we're going to increase this and we're going to increase that and we're going to increase the other thing, where's the money coming from if funding is level? Okay. So that's my major concern with all of this. It's not this specific issue, which sounds like a reasonable thing to do. It's what's going to take the hit and how are we going to be impacted by that?
Okay.
That's my concern.
Great. Good comment.
I mean,
and maybe if we can capture too the what I heard you say was striking that balance of between the flat funding conversation that you heard earlier and creating new programs. There needs to be some balance there in order to make that really pencil out. Without just impacting other programs in order to accommodate new things.
More information about impact on each of these
Okay.
program strategies that you have now.
Okay, great.
A little more information.
All right, excellent.
So we know what we're looking at.
Okay.
I could comment a little better.
And is that financial impact still?
Yes.
this
And an
brings
interest in getting more information from OWEB about that is what I heard you say too.
And this
Those
brings
impacts.
up, goes back to the monitoring and, you know, the cost effectiveness of methods and projects, and using, you know, that monitoring and what you learn from that to develop criteria for what type of projects and things are the most cost effective for the limited amount of dollars that are available.
Okay. So let's make sure, maybe after this we could go over and see if we capture that comment, and if not, get that over there, unless you're tying it to this.
I'm
Okay.
tying it to this, when you balance this against all the other types of projects and types of funds. Because you don't necessarily put 20% in this, you know, 50%, however, you know, split it up however way. You base the division of your dollars based on where they do the most benefit.
Okay. So just trying to capture that with respect to this emerging issues, are you suggesting that if you did the effectiveness monitoring and you learned that certain activities or approaches are more cost effective than others and you employ those, then you have some savings realized there that would allow some of these to happen? I'm trying to figure out if you're teeing off of his comment
I was
or
teeing
okay.
off of his, but you know, because he's, you know, rightly concerned about, you know, losing funds for other existing programs. But if there's something new that potentially could be better use of those dollars in this category, why shouldn't it pull from those categories?
Okay.
Does that, I mean,
It sounds like you're getting to the innovative comment that Liz made too, in terms of innovative methods and doing some exploratory work that could find some of those realized savings through this that would have a relationship to the monitoring.
So could you sum up your idea for me? Sorry. I just want to be able to make sure I'm capturing what you're saying.
well, I guess,
Yeah, I think what I heard you say was that you think an important criteria for the board in this competitive offering for emerging issues category is the ecological benefit of the project being proposed or something like that.
yeah, but I guess I was building off of his comment about, you know, funding for different program areas. And, you know, I don't think they necessarily should be divided, you know, 30, 30, 30, 10 or whatever. I think they should be able to float based on what gets the greatest benefit for the dollar spent.
So funding should be allocated
Funding
in a flexible way.
in a flexible way that we can get the most out of the money spent.
I mean, I think that sounds like a great idea. I think in reality for OWEB's budgeting 2-year budgeting cycle, that would probably be pretty difficult, and because they would want to be looking at, you know, they're going to need this much for council support, and they're going to need this much for restoration grants. And I mean, this seems a little bit like this isn't the appropriate term, but the slush fund, where you can use some amount of money for the hot topics of the day or the emergency situations, and what you're trying to do through this is to kind of create a process around, you know, what you've been doing in the past.
Good. So it sounds like there's some general interest in this, and there's an interest in thinking about carving up some funding for it. Maybe one way to look at it is over kind of the long term. Now that we've got permanent funding, maybe you do this periodically over time, and it allows you to get to some of the flexibility you're talking about. So it doesn't get constrained by those limitations of a 2-year biennium, where you'd be throwing things in whack if you move from one to the other in a short period of time. Does that work?
And one of the problems with
Make sure to use the mic too.
one of the problems with putting a fixed amount in a program like this is you don't know what you're going to get for, and if you don't get something that's good, use it in your other programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So create funds for this, but also have a flexible way that you administer that. So if you have savings, you use it. Okay, good.
Don't be forced to spend it on something that's not good.
Yeah.
Just because it's in your budget.
So that leads to my question, and another overall question is, and I didn't hear it in the presentation that we started with, was once they make a decision on the long-term investment strategy.
Up a little closer. Yeah.
Once they make a decision on the long-term investment strategy, is this going to be set for 10 years, 20 years, or is there going to be flexibility in how they allocate funds among the efforts?
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think to answer your question, I do think we want flexibility, but what I hear you saying is OWEB should maybe provide more clarity about what the time frame is for some of these things.
That would be helpful.
Okay. So it was OWEB provide clarity around the time frames for the long-term investment strategy more broadly, but also these program areas like this. What's kind of the time frame in mind? And programs within it. Okay, other ideas around emerging issues? I did mention one area that this also tried to capture, we heard in the first listening sessions, was around the idea that there are certain project types, Liz, you mentioned the innovative, that don't fit very well sometimes in our regular program because they're new or they're different, or they don't fit well geographically because you might want to work across boundaries or regionally, across regions. So that was another theme in what this is trying to capture. Technical assistance that could cover an entire, region and not just one council or one district area or one basin. So we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits and consequences, a little bit about the criteria. What about process? Are there any process considerations, knowing what you know about our process? Regional review teams, statewide teams, grant applications, grant agreements, periodic grant offerings every 6 months, things like that come to mind for how we ought to administer this, if we do it?
I think a defined, consistent timeline would be very appreciated.
And maybe some advance notice of the board in maybe the next year or the next biennium wants to put some emphasis on an emergent issue. And this is the issue, and give folks a chance to gear up maybe for
Good. So an
early
early signal about that. So you've got time to prepare and think about it.
Given that these might cross regional boundaries or be statewide issues, it seems like, like in brainstorm mode, it might make sense to have one team that looks at emerging issues. It's a statewide team and pulled from the different review teams or something, and that's what they do over a 4-year period or whatever. They're the team that looks at emerging issues and scores them and ranks them or decides whether they should be funded or not.
Okay, so the idea of a unique team for this,
yeah,
specifically. Okay. Others weigh in? You like that idea? Okay. Good. All right. Other ideas about this? How about the competitive offering element to this? That's another piece that's embedded in the title, and the idea is that there'd be I think with the early signaling you were talking about and the notification that there would be an offering of this type, that there would be some mechanism to have those emerging ideas compete. I see some head nods. Is that a good way to think about this?
I'll do a here to that comment, mostly because I'm assuming most of the ones so far are the ones that are considered non-competitive grants in OGMIS. And so I have to ask the question of if these are coming in the door and getting funded internally without a lot of outward conversation, what are the opportunities we've missed all these years that could be emerging issues? Because it wasn't a competitive cycle that was offered where people can start thinking around them and putting proposals together. It was kind of whoever came together and said, hey, I know, let's ask OWEB, and it's all been so insulated. And I'm not saying that good things did not come out of the previous approach, but I'm wondering what did we miss because we didn't have more of an open, competitive process.
Okay, good. So it sounds like you're generally supportive of this concept, that because it can promote that innovation and those ideas if it's more clear and transparent.
I think the idea of it being competitive is kind of cool, and you might get some really interesting stuff. I think given that this is about emerging issues and you have a 2-year kind of window, in hearing what Tom said, you'll probably have stuff come in the door that doesn't maybe fit within the grant cycles, and you might want to give yourself some flexibility too to be able to review proposals that come in that are maybe not competitive or that don't go through a typical competitive process. So you have more flexibility, I guess. I mean, I could see doing a little bit of both.
Okay, good.
Non-competitive projects or applications?
I think it's allow for some non-competitive offerings. I mean, really, it's offering, and so keep both is what I'm hearing you saying. There are some cases where you would want to do this, but as Liz said, there's a lot of good that can come from the competitive aspects of it through promoting ideas and projects.
How can they really not be competitive? I mean, if there's a pool of money, somebody brings you a proposal. If there's a pool of money, somebody brings you a proposal, somebody has to look at it and decide, and they got to weigh it against something, so it's competitive.
Yeah, I think what Liz was talking about is that we have some of the types of projects that we have in OGMIS, our grant management system, have not had the same grant review process that others do. So there's not a pool of projects competing for the same dollars or the same target. Don't go through a full review process. That might just be one project that gets submitted for OWEB funding without competition against others. So that's kind of the difference in what we're talking about here, where the competitive nature of this would be to have a specific offering so that there would be multiple ideas and proposals come in theoretically for those, and they compete against each other. And what we also heard is that there may be some need to have non-competitive for certain types of things, so don't rule that out altogether, was the comment. Okay, anything else on this that is grabbing you? The one theme around this too is the idea that there would be more short-term, kind of one-time shot funding for these. There was a question last night in one of our other listening sessions about, well, how come you couldn't just do this through the focused investments? And part of the idea around this is this would be kind of a one-time deal, whereas the focused investments are intended to be, multi-year commitment to things. So that's just another aspect of what's being considered here. Research, we didn't talk about that. That was another area that now under Measure 76, where we don't have a dedicated research pot of funding, and I think it gets to the kind of innovative idea that might be the kind of thing you would fund through this work as well. Anything else on the emerging issues?
Is this where OWEB would fund emergency situations too?
Well, it's a great question, and we heard in some of the listening sessions the first time around the desire to have emergency funding, and I think there's probably some different opinions about whether we should do that or not. And so I think the board didn't land on this being emergency funding, but one way to capture some elements of that perhaps. So I think to be determined. Anything else on this one?
We didn't really address the criteria. I'm asking.
Yeah. Yeah, do you want to talk some about that? What should some of the thresholds or filters be as we offer these, if we do this?
Is the board going to have flexibility, or is this going to be politically motivated? I mean, is the governor or the legislature going to say, well, here's something we want you to do, and I see this as being used for that, but I don't know how much say the board will have in it in terms of criteria.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think for some things, you know, if the governor says we would want you to do this, we're probably going to respond positively. But this isn't exclusive to that. So these are other things that we heard folks wanting from around the different regions. The opportunity to do these cross-regional work together, to do innovative and research areas. So I think it's certainly more than that. So I do think that we'll have criteria. I also believe and know that, you know, when, say, the governor's office has a priority, I'm sure they're more than happy to go through our process for many of those things. And they're not just emergencies that need to be done yesterday, but filling out the right paperwork and having a review process is something that can be applied. So I do think criteria is relevant here. And recognizing, yes, there may be some cases where you wouldn't be able to apply all of them all the time.
What kind of criteria came out in the other listening session?
Well, we only have one just last night, and I don't know that we got a lot on that either. Do you remember, Emily?
I think one piece of criteria that came out was the idea of having different categories for emerging funds, like maybe having a research category that had maybe even separate criteria than an innovative criteria or an innovative section or innovative funding. That was one thing I remember.
Okay.
I can definitely see how having a process, even for like priorities from a governor, could benefit OWEB in the future. In case there would happen to be a governor who maybe wasn't politically aligned with your priorities, it might make sense actually to have a process by which you would judge those proposals.
Okay, good. All right, well, I think we've hit our time limit. Is that right, Kathy? Okay, so I think we're ready to shift gears. So remember, if you've got additional ideas, certainly, and for those on the webinar, send those in to us. We'll have a Survey Monkey, and we're open to input. So thank you very much.
We're gonna, just like you did in the other groups, we've got 2 sections to talk about, and there is a lot of overlap between them. We found this in the first group. I'm sure they found it in Newport as well. So what we want to talk about in this group is first the open solicitation. So as Tom mentioned when he went through this, there are a lot of components to this one, probably the most of any of the sections. So one piece is expanding the small grant program by increasing the available funding and expanding the types of grants beyond just restoration. So the potential exists here to expand and have outreach, for example, be a part of the small grants program, monitoring as a part of the small grants program. The second piece then is the regular restoration grants, which most people are used to that term if you come through our programs at all. would have a cap on the individual applications. And as Tom mentioned, again, the goal of that is then to set aside a new process, a new statewide process for the bigger ticket items. So a $70,000 project isn't competing against $1 million, and then developing a specific grant strategy around outreach. So our questions for you, just like they have been in the other pieces, what are the benefits and consequences that you see for those ideas for criteria and process, and is there anything missing? And whoever wants to start gets this. And I'll let you guys pass it around.
I have a question rather than a comment, and that is, when you say increase funding for small grants, what do you mean by that? And do you mean to accomplish more or different things than the current program?
So in the concept, it is increasing the available funding for the program. And so yes, more types of grant offerings, not necessarily more money per individual grant, but more types of offering, more, yes, and potentially more money. So our question for you is, what would that look like?
Well, can I follow up? I guess I'm concerned because what I hear moving around the room is we want to do more of this and more of that, and I'm concerned about what the hit will be on the regular grant process, which in my mind is sort of the state engine for restoration. So these are all good things, although I'm not sure I agree with the small grant emphasis. In my mind, that it's such a small amount of money per grant that I'm not sure what the overall effectiveness has been. I guess that's something to look at. But my major concern is if this is all this new stuff is going to come out of the regular solicitation, what's that program going to look like, and how will that impact us?
Okay, good. Other comments?
What do you mean by research? I mean, if Alex and I were writing
speak into
grants,
it.
he'd get all the money. I wouldn't get anything because I don't know how to write a grant. So I can see people writing grants for experts write really good sounding grants, but what are they going to do? What they going to do with the money?
So the question, the concern is making sure that the outcome at the end of the day, that we're actually investing in the right projects.
Yeah, is it doing something what OWEB's supposed to be doing?
Okay.
I mean, you've heard me say over and over already that I want money for the watershed councils to do riparian work for water quality in these dang fish, and that's all I want. Period. Because that's what this whole thing started for back in the 2000s. And now we're off, you know, we're getting weed money through ODA and soil and water districts, so we just keep adding on more things and peeling off the cash, and pretty soon we don't have this fish thing solved. We got real temperature problems coming if a certain judge rules the wrong way. We're in big trouble.
So the question, making sure that it doesn't kind of spread the soup too thin.
Yeah, right.
Okay, good.
Liz, you're up. I guess I am.
Diversifying the types of small grant opportunities that could be.
Because we just keep spreading it out further.
So do you have something, Liz?
I have a question and potentially a comment. So my question is, if we expand the small grant program, is the intent to continue administering it through the teams?
That's actually, so I'll ask that back. What would be your guys' thought? Is that the way to do it? Is that the Liz right now has the microphone. We'll pass it to you in just a second.
Well, that was one of my comments, is I do have concerns about the capacity of the teams to continue doing that work if it becomes expanded, because I know in some areas we are pretty strapped for time to go through those processes and probably aren't as good at being acute to the details when we're reviewing them because we just don't have the time. It's not something that's easily funds our time. Does that make sense? We're basically taking it from whatever time we can get. And so I'm not sure the accountability there is as good as it could be if it wasn't something we do on the side of everything else that we do.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're adding a star to that.
Yes, so Liz raises the dark side to it. I prefer to think that most watershed councils don't float a small grant that isn't going to pass a sniff test. And yes, there are instances where people have, it's rare, but where people in our team don't approve it. But usually, again, you're not in this game very long before you figure out what flies and what doesn't. So I don't see the increased effort to review small grants as being too arduous.
Okay.
It's there. It's just not too arduous. Well, we'll be submitting more precise comments, but I don't see diluting it with outreach and monitoring as being helpful. I'm a restoration guy. That's it.
Okay, so is that specific to the small grant program? Okay. Okay.
Which is a great program.
Okay.
I have a question, and that is something driving a need for more small grants or an interest to have more funds in that program? In OWEB's experience, are you receiving feedback to increase that program, or what is driving that interest?
I think there's a little, and I'll look to Lori and Tom too. I think there's a couple pieces to it. One is that the component of the outreach and monitoring, that there are a lot of those type of projects that are that small, under $10,000, that don't now come through that program. We have a once-a-year offering for outreach. We have once-a-year-ish offering for monitoring. And so it's that ability to be quicker, more nimble, more responsive, use that model for other things beyond the restoration projects that it has seemed to work for and been pretty nimble with before.
I'll just borrow this. The other piece is it's linked to what you'll talk about next, focused investments. Tom said at the beginning in his overview that the premise is, if over time more money is moved gradually into focused investments, is this a way to keep more opportunities statewide by doing more small grants, capping regular grants, and having a mechanism to do the really big ones? Because is this a way to keep more opportunities out there for more people to take advantage of if you've got more going into focused investments over time? That's part of the question.
That's a great idea, Lori. And I guess what I would wonder about is, and I think when somebody brought it up, is just how effective you can really be with a small grant. How much can you really get done with less than $10,000 with whether it's a restoration or a monitoring or an education or outreach grant? I mean, those are really small pots of money, and how much can you really accomplish would be the concern, I guess.
So should the amount be increased by some amount?
Well, yeah, then maybe it's not a small grant anymore. That's
well, just think about inflation.
Yeah,
no. At the time, that was set in 2004.
Right.
The $10,000 limit.
I mean, certainly if you're kind of thinking about these, stratifying the grants a little bit differently than you have in the past, I could see a larger small grant pot of, small grants being able to be larger. I don't know much about the small grant review process, to be honest, so I don't know what sort of thoroughness those reviews get. But if you're in the $25,000 range, I would hope that projects are getting reviewed.
I'm sure we have a breakdown of the number of applications and grants that have, over the years, that have fallen in a different cost range. It might be interesting to look at and see the distribution over time, if we're going up or down, or where most of them fall out.
Good idea. Okay. So do you mind if I jump in, because we probably have about 15 or 20 minutes left? We have other stuff up on the.
Yes. So thank you for that. So the
other things on the.
Yeah. So I guess I'll shift us. This has been a great small grant conversation, but so the next question is this cap on a regular grant program. So we have and do have coming in $1 million plus projects, $750,000 plus projects. What's the thought from those of you who are implementing these? Is there a way to take a look at those and say, okay, let's have a state solicitation for those, separate and distinct from the restoration projects regular grant program? Thoughts? There are thoughts. You're not sure what to say with them, but I can see them turning.
Yes, I'm not quite ready. I'm still thinking, but I think the question that comes up is if you have X amount of dollars, you're looking to where best to allocate those within your programs. So that's what we're grappling with here. But you know, if you have a large project, $1 billion project, you know, if it's, which I don't. Well, I could think about a few dams on my system, but if you do have $1 million project, but it's a high priority, ecological priority across the state, why not fund that? You know, if you have a mission and you have goals and objectives, and this particular project would help you achieve that, and you can clearly see that it will. Why not fund it?
And do you have, one of the questions becomes, is it comfortable to say those are competing against other projects at the state level? One of the concerns we've heard is those big projects compete in their region, and one project could basically, suck a lot of the resources out of that region. So does it help to say those are going to compete against each other at one level?
I like that idea.
Okay. There's lots of head nodding.
I think I think that makes a lot of sense from a lot of different perspectives. To have these big ticket projects compete against themselves on a statewide basis keeps the momentum going at the regional level then, so you're not kind of losing a year when one huge project gets funded and all the rest don't.
So, I've got one.
There's a place for this, but not in direct competition with much smaller applicants. So you like the idea of separating these out? Yeah. Okay.
Another way to fund big ticket items is through the strategic investment partnerships, where, not everybody has those in the state, but they're going to move around from time to time, I would gather, and those are opportunities too.
Okay, so one option would be to say the big ticket ones need to come through a focused investment.
Not necessarily have to, but
okay.
but that would be one option.
Okay, good.
And it seems like you already have an established system for that focused investment, and so you could easily just expand this idea into the SIP.
A focused investment.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last piece, are other last comments on this one before the outreach strategy?
Before you leave that, here's an oddball idea, and that is, how about a sliding scale of match? The larger the project, the more match they got to come to the table with.
We don't take wild ideas. Thanks, though.
Well, I understand, but anyway, it's a thought.
Good.
So that $1 million project that in fact will take all the money out of Region 1 for the next 6 months. The other oddball idea is, again, can the losers bracket automatically qualify for the next round? And I know this is a bigger issue OWEB has wrestled with in the past, but qualify immediately for the next round so that people don't have to rewrite the same applications in the new revised OWEB form 6 months later.
Can we get that on the flip chart? Can we say we're not going to keep adapting the application each cycle?
You can absolutely put that on the flip chart.
But back to topic. I actually had the same idea, wondering if we have a sliding scale on match with the big ticket items earlier. I think it's a great idea. And just another here on the concept of, I think it's a great idea to start thinking small, medium, large. And because I have a feeling that we'd start comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges a little more, because I'm assuming those big ticket items are always going to be, not always, but are more likely to have more, a larger scale impact. So they do tend to score higher.
Yeah.
But there could be mid-range ones that are good for what they are and where they're at, but aren't going to compete against that large-scale impact.
Okay, good. So I'm going to move us to the last piece, which is this, and the reason, again, this is up here, the development of an outreach grant strategy. Right now there's about $500,000 a year, or for the biennium, a year. It's one grant cycle a year. There's been a lot of push that that's not enough, it's too broad, or it's too narrow, or it's too this, or it's too that. So the question here is, should OWEB invest its time and energy in the development of strategy that partners with other outreach funders to leverage some additional investment? So comments, thoughts? Is that an approach? We heard a lot about outreach in the first listening session, so we want to address. So is it worthwhile for OWEB to invest its time and efforts in this development of a common outreach strategy, leveraging with other funders? Is that a solution to we heard a lot about outreach in the first listening session. Does that help address it?
By common outreach strategy, you mean using the same method that everybody else uses for outreach?
To be defined in the strategy, but the thought is, how does OWEB's investment leverage with other investment? Gray Family Foundation and others, how do you develop a larger than OWEB strategy to address this, rather than kind of, it feels a little bit like we're just throwing.
At program level. Yeah.
Well, that was my next question. Like the Nature Conservancy coughs up a few dollars and OWEB coughs up a bunch to buy land. Is that what you're talking about?
No, this is just specifically on outreach. This is about landowner outreach, outreach to schools. This is, so not restoration projects. This is about outreach projects. Oh, we've got a couple. So there and then here.
I like that. I like the idea of OWEB looking to partner on a common outreach strategy across the state, because I think that would help build support for the agency and for the work all of us do, so long as there's still opportunity for organizations or maybe a region to pursue individual grants, or like a organizational grant or a regional grant. So I think both would be beneficial.
Okay, so a question, what I hear in that, I want to make sure I've heard this right. So there could be an overall strategy, but that strategy provides the opportunity for regions or local areas to apply into it. It's not just, we picked this area for our strategy, right? Is that?
No, I'll I'll clarify. So the question that you asked, yes, I do think that's a good idea for OWEB to look to partner to develop a common outreach strategy or implement a common outreach strategy across the state. That common strategy would, benefit or create awareness across the state for the agency and for the work that we do. And so long as you still provide an opportunity for individual organizations or regions to have access to outreach dollars as well, because there are outreach needs that are going to be specific to a watershed or a region. And so if you make both of those, if you invest in both of those efforts,
Okay.
statewide, agency run or implemented, and then an opportunity for individuals.
Okay, we had here and then.
I guess one thought is, I mean, at least in Region 1 where I'm on the review team, and this has probably been true for the last few years, I don't know that outreach is the right term, at least for the types of grants that we're getting. They're more education grants. So I don't know if that changes the conversation at all. I don't know if that's true in other regions, but that's really the predominant type of application that I think is coming through Region 1.
And the comment I would just make is that we do have a number of different types of outreach grants, and outreach is a term that has many meanings to many people, and it's not all the same. And for example, the group before you thought that the outreach grant should focus on landowner recruitment, that was the most important use. And so that's because it's all things with not a lot of money. The question is, should we focus, for example?
And my assumption that outreach included education. Eve and I both operate a pretty busy education schedule, and it's field related. So applicable to your outreach grant program. So what I thought you were talking about here was actually expanding the opportunity to apply for outreach / education money by leveraging with other partners and making the fund pot bigger.
I think that's part of what does the strategy look like, and I think, Eve, that's where I maybe got lost in yours, is I think that was the concept, not OWEB doing outreach about OWEB, but expanding the resource available for investment in outreach.
And I would support that.
And our time's up. This piece, again, tied a lot in with the conversation about open solicitation. This piece is about focused investments, and the concept, the proposal here is to phase in a gradual increase in this investment area over time. As Tom mentioned before, we have some current ones. We have the Willamette, Deschutes, Klamath, SIPs, and the whole Watershed Restoration Initiative. It's not necessarily saying a gradual increase in those four. It's a gradual increase in this type of investment over time. Developing some very specific criteria and process for board selection of, and this is a term of art that we would love your help in defining, collaboratively prioritized ecological outcomes. We'll come back to that. And then update the criteria and process and improve transparency. Those were things that we heard fairly consistently. And the collaboratively prioritized, we had some folks in the listening session saying the board needs to set priorities. We had other people in the listening session saying the priorities need to come locally. What the board would like some feedback on is they would like that to be a both. So how do we set up a system that allows priorities to come locally and also allows for recognition of state? So thoughts on that. But so the first question, of course, again, the benefits and consequences that you see in this concept, and then we'll talk about criteria. Some of you guys have some very specific experience here. Love your feedback. So, thoughts? Eve?
Well, a question. Does OWEB ever participate in the prioritization of regional outcomes, ecological outcomes, or statewide? Because it seems like if OWEB staff participated in those discussions, you would have that combination of local and, statewide overview. Or
so what I'd love to put that down as a suggestion, that it is so what you're saying is staff provides that link to here's what's important statewide in conversation with folks locally and regionally.
Correct. So
Okay.
you would just participate. So you'd have that integration.
Okay, good. There's thoughts about this. Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
When you say a gradual increase over time, that could mean a lot of things.
Oh,
now,
yes.
do we, let's say, do you phase out one SIP before you have 2 or 3 more, or?
I think that's, honestly, that's part of the question that we have is, so if you do a gradual increase over time, you do have some that, the thought would be you've got some that are reaching a maximum point, you've got some others that are coming in, you've got some focus investments that are a 2-year investment and they're in and done. You've got some that are 18 to 20 years, is that? So the question is, how do you, if you're phasing in a gradual increase over time, how does that work?
Another question.
Yes.
Another question.
Yeah.
When you say reaching a maximum, how does OWEB define reaching a maximum? If you were to articulate that.
That's one of the things that we want to develop as a part of the focus investment strategies. What does that look like? We've piloted, 3 SIPs and a whole watershed restoration initiative, and we're learning through that process. So as a part of that, what should it look like moving forward? Is it OWEB defined? Is it implementer defined?
Both.
Okay. So thoughts about that? So since Eve has the mic now and she's going to punch you potentially. So what's the both? Talk about the both. What do you think that looks like?
Remind me of that.
That the trajectory is both OWEB defined and implementer defined. How could that look?
Well, I think both sides, we're partners. And so we bring unique perspective, and by defining a single perspective or a unified perspective, it's more valuable than just either side. And
Okay.
so I think OWEB and partners or implementers should both be involved in the conversation and should develop this cap or this max that you referred to.
Okay, good. No, I would say we've not broached the conversation of time and total investment, because I think we're still too new in it. So the ways that could happen would be great to hear.
Well, you know, and I said neither, not because, but because there's a critical third component missing, and that's the landowners, and who aren't necessarily involved in OWEB. They're not necessarily involved in the active restoration community, but they have a critical voice that should not be left out.
Okay, good. So a combined conversation of the folks where the projects are happening, the implementers, and the funders. And I say funders plurally because in these cases there are multiple, the goal is a multiple funder strategy. Okay, what other thoughts, benefits, consequences, criteria, what else?
About the gradual increase. I'm still
Yes.
interested in.
Yes, what's your thought about the gradual increase over time?
I think you have to define the cap first, or that maximum criteria.
And I use I didn't mean what's the maximum for each, but what's the trajectory of the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's not you're never going to get more money than this. It's what does the trajectory of that that program look like?
The reason that you're contemplating a gradual increase over time, I'm assuming, is because you feel like it will be more, you'll get better ecological outcomes.
There are kind of probably a set of things. So doing multiple investments over multiple years gets you to scale, so ecological outcomes. It provides, the thought is, does it provide better leverage to bring other funders to the table because they know there's a funder in there for the long haul? Does it allow the entities to ramp up to do those kind of bigger investments? So it's a multiple social funding and ecological.
I think the notion of sort of phasing these or staging these special investments or focused investments would be good, so that the financial impact to the rest of your program isn't too great. But recognizing these are probably going to be maybe regional type projects that don't benefit everybody in the state.
Okay.
I would think you'd want to stage them somewhat, and sort of have a plan over a number of years on how you would do that and where you're going to go next.
Okay.
So as you're phasing a SIP down, maybe you can start ramping up another one.
Okay.
That's just a suggestion.
So that's kind of a criteria and process suggestion.
Yep. Good. What else on this concept? So how do we select amongst all the competing ecological priorities in the state?
I think that follows Larry's comments very well, in that you can't do everything at once, so you need to rotate it. Spread the pain, spread the wealth.
And I would guess these guys would say it is both pain and wealth.
Right. So, I mean, the Willamette Valley, dominates the state in so many ways, ecologically and culturally. But if you want to spread it outside of the valley, Deschutes, Klamath, then I'm a big fan of don't do a new one until you take an old one out. And as far as the increase goes, I'd say no, but that's just one opinion. And I don't have a SIP, so that's why.
So I heard you say don't don't do an increase, but then you said, but I don't have a SIP. So maybe is that you're saying if you did? What I'm trying to figure out, is there a structure under which these could go forward that would provide benefits that people would see it would be worth doing the greater investment?
Yes, we're patient. If the Willamette Valley SIP ended in 2022, then we'd love a North Coast or a coastal SIP. And you could keep the funding flat between now and then.
And I would think that a condition of having a new focused investment would be major funding partners have to be lined up.
So this is good. Actually, that is another question we want to ask. So what are the criteria? What makes this different than an open solicitation? So major funding partners. What are other things that draw something from an open solicitation, grant by grant, into a programmatic investment? Large scale. Talk about that.
Well, it's an opportunity if you have large-scale projects or a geographic area you're focused on. You know, this special investments program allows you to complete the work in that area defined.
Okay. So large scale, but there's a second component in there, an investment that allows you to complete the work over time. Okay. What else?
Maybe this goes without saying, but it ought to offer capacity building through planning, through capacity, through project implementation, through project effectiveness and monitoring. It should ideally fund the whole gamut of costs.
Good. And I don't think it goes without saying. I think that's different for us. So what else on this? It's passed you a couple times, Liz, and you should probably just grab it.
I kind of wonder, this goes back to what we were talking about during the break, is I'm kind of curious. If most councils, we'll just say most councils, probably have strategic thinking already embedded in their organization. So I almost wonder if we ask the question, what do you guys have going on that you're just piecemealing and breaking up into the regular grant cycle, that if we shifted you over to this, that you do have a strategy?
Mm-hmm.
I think most councils may have a general strategic approach to restoration that they are pursuing, but are breaking it up.
Yeah.
And that they might be able to get it done to scale more efficiently with capacity if we migrated them over. So the question of increasing isn't really a question as much, because you shift them over to a strategic approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I hear a couple things in that they come at multiple scales.
Mm-hmm.
So an individual council may have a strategy, and right now they're applying because it's where they can apply through the regular grant program on grant by grant.
And probably to multiple sources. They probably are bringing in multiple sources and piecing together the puzzle pieces of their strategy, and it's more work and that may not be necessary if we migrated more of those over to strategic, so that you'd be able to move some of your regular grant funds over there too. Does that make sense?
So the funds go along with the project because they're no longer applying through the regular grant program. So okay. Other thoughts about? All right, what else?
So just a question. We've talked a little bit about criteria for identifying what these would look like. Are there things you can think of that the board could do in its selection? Ultimately, the board will have to pick some. And so are there things that you would want to see in that whole selection process that would make it... Anyway, I'm just curious if you have ideas about that. I mean, how should that be done?
Yeah, and so I might even hone it in more. So if you take the concept that Liz just talked about, right? But you're not going to do all of your funding that way. what is it that makes the strategic plan that the council or district or whomever has developed something that you say, okay, that one's ripe for investment? Is it one council, or does it have to be more than one? Is it one funder, or does it have to be more than one? Is it, what is it that says, yeah, that's ready? They really are. They don't just say they have a plan, they really do.
What was used in the past?
So in 2000, I'm going back to when I was on the board, in 2010, there was a 8-question proposal that talked about, is it landscape scale? So you had to talk about scale. You had to talk about the number of implementers, the leveraged funding. It also asked about, it was kind of a nebulous word. What's impact? So there was a set of basically 8 questions that they wrote to, strategic or plan developed. That's one of the questions we have for you guys. We would look at that as a starting place, but from the implementer end, is it? Are those the things we should be asking?
I like at least some of those ones you said, the landscape scale, and I think chance of success is another one that needs to be, how likely it is to succeed at its objectives,
Okay, good. So likeliness of success, likelihood of success, landscape scale. What about anything from the landowner perspective that, between you and Dale, if you know there's an investment coming to your area, what do you want to see from the landowner perspective?
participation by all the landowners, or a large percentage of them.
The least amount of land displaced from agriculture.
Okay.
And there are, it's addressing some of those issues that we have on a landscape scale is where we are really lacking.
Okay, good.
I like adding cost-benefit ratio to the criteria.
And tell me a little bit more about that.
Thought you might ask that.
Speak to me on that one, Eve.
I don't have an example off of the top of my head, but I think any time he clearly does.
So let me ask it. I'm going to ask you first.
Okay.
So is it a cost of project compared to ecological outcome? Is it a cost of project and the potential return? So if you do great outreach and get the landowners involved, you may not have achieved an ecological outcome right there, but you're going to. What are when you think about that from your own perspective, on your own projects, what are the things that trigger in your mind that this is a worthwhile investment for your council to make?
Thank you for asking that clarifying question. That was helpful. I think there's an ecological outcome that we consider. So it might be stream miles accessed, it might be acres treated, but the outreach and the social component, that is clearly really important as well. So, through this outreach effort, is it going to get all of the landowners on board or most of the landowners on board? So both of those are important.
And it sounds like it may be asking the question of the council or district or local entities to say, did you go through this analysis and how did you get to this point? Not us saying this is the cost benefit ratio that we're looking for, but that you've gone through the thought process.
Yes, the organization demonstrates that.
Okay. Peter?
So I'll use an example to illustrate what I see as cost benefit thing. On the one hand, you you have two options. You can take and invest money into new restoration, planting trees. It's going to take them 20, 50 years to reach full height and get your shading benefits on the stream. On the other hand, you could take that money and you could invest in care and maintenance of existing moderately healthy habitat that's on the decline because of certain invasive species. And so which one of those gives you a better cost benefit? And I mean, it's a big question that I don't think we're addressing well.
Or what combination of those?
Yeah.
There are some interesting models around the state that are looking at kind of that. So what's the combination of things that at the landscape scale gives you? Okay.
Just wanted to follow up on the cost benefit ratio, that there's a connection to likelihood of success. You know,
Okay.
so actions that have been implemented and have proven to be successful. So there's a connection there.
Okay, good. Others.
Yeah, so can you kind of, what is the actual benefit that you're talking about, the combination of?
So,
Well, I'm talking about, I guess the relative cost benefits of different projects.
Okay.
Different types of projects.
The example I thought was useful.
yeah. So,
Do you plant new plants
or do you
save
maintain?
something that's already there?
Yeah.
That you're in danger of losing because of the ivy. And I mean, there's lots of good examples of that. And, you know, some places we start losing those trees because of the ivy, you know, well, I mean,
Now they're gone,
hard
now
to
you
get
have
them back.
now you
Now you
what
gotta
do you
restore
do?
it. Now you gotta restore it rather than take care of it.
Okay, so other thoughts about this? Processes, yeah.
Question.
Yes.
How do acquisitions play into this whole discussion? Are they a part of these focused investments? Are they something else?
So it's going to be my favorite answer. What would you propose?
Well, I like to have a full toolbox so we can take advantage of all of those tools to achieve objectives. We do that in our own council area, and we're not a land trust, but we work cooperatively with Mackenzie River Trust to do that. So it's a good partnership, and I think it's a good model for proceeding.
Okay, good. Peter's going to respond to that.
I mean, one needs to be really, really careful with acquisitions, you know, for a number of reasons. One, I think that we don't have the capacity to care for them long term. I mean, the currently held state lands are fairly poorly cared for, and acquiring more at this juncture is not necessarily the wisest thing to do.
All right, and Dale, did you want to? Dale and then Liz.
Peter's right. I mean, U.S. Fish and Wildlife and a refuge, they're the poorest farmers in the world. And they buy the land, they tie it up, it produces nothing. The geese eat Peter's crops up. I don't own anything anymore, but they're eating my dairy farmer's crops up in Tillamook because the refuge looks like this floor. And they want more land all the time. And there's a land trust in North Tillamook County bought land. It's growing up the blackberries and tansy ragwort and producing nothing. And I'm a born farmer and will be till I die, and I don't buy that baloney at all. And they're paying way too much money. They're paying 3 times and more the actual value of the land in these grants. And that's public money being wasted, in my view, to buy land that will never be taken care of. In fact, Nature Conservancy, a guy in Portland, said, I hate buying land because it costs too much to take care of it. I said, quit buying it. You're not taking care of it now. So I agree with Peter. There's some land that's fine to buy it and turn it back, but we're not making more farmland in this state. We're covering it up with pavement. We're buying it and letting it go back to weeds. And I don't buy that. I mean, Tom and Meadows heard me say that over and over. They're tired of it, but You asked me, I told you.
I absolutely. Yes.
I guess I have a slightly different perspective on it. I don't think I don't look at it as acquisition the right approach or not, or do you invest in the area that has weeds but some intact forest versus none at all? But rather, it's more place based, I think, and I'll feed this back into the questions here. Is that it's are you looking at a area that you've prioritized by whatever criteria your organization has deemed worthy, and are you looking at the answers that make sense there with the community that's there? So for example, we'll work at a tributary and engage the landowners through the tributary and look at what are the concerns there. Let's assess the priority concerns and then talk to the landowners. What do you think are the options in the toolbox? I agree that they're all tools in the toolbox. What options work here? And some of the questions you would feed into that are, can you maintain an acquisition site somehow? Or do you look at a different tool? Is it CREP? Is it, whatever it is that makes sense? And now, are you asking those questions? Because I think once you start talking broader, does acquisition work? Does this work? It works in different places. So
In
it's more
different ways in different
place-based.
places.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at these focused investments, are you asking and answering those questions with all the right players?
So that comes again back then to a piece of this kind of criterion process is are those local groups, when they present this proposal that matches with statewide priorities or however that's done, are they thinking through the questions as the proposal that they've put into place say these are the things we thought about, these are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and in our place we propose. Okay, good.
So basically,
Good
I don't think there's a silver bullet. There's multiple solutions at specific sites.
Okay, good. So, other thoughts on this? I saw some head nodding there. Yeah. All right.
It's a question. Actually, he might answer it first, and that is, what about acquisitions that aren't ag land?
I don't care.
Bingo. Thank you. Let the record show.
All right. So I'm feeling like we've got a lot of the concepts out for folks. So I don't want to, drag you kicking and screaming further than we need to. But any other thoughts that we've missed as you guys are going through this?
At this point.
So I'll go basically to what we got from the board, which is really kind of as far as it went at that point, and that is there wasn't a comfort saying the board will select the priorities, and this, it really was that feeling of, and there wasn't a comfort with just saying whatever pops up locally is the right thing. So what the board really wants some feedback on is, what does it look like when it's collaboratively prioritized? How do you get to that point? And I think Eve talked some at the beginning about making sure that OWEB fully invests staff into those conversations so that staff can be that liaison between local implementers and the board. Are there other ways, other concepts that make that a collaborative so that we're not saying that, by gosh, we're going to invest in Tillamook, and the folks in Tillamook are saying we didn't want that investment, or that we want to invest in X in Tillamook, and Dale's saying, but what we need in Tillamook is riparian investment, so why are you doing that when this is what we need? So how do we make sure that that conversation is as collaborative as possible? Before I invest anywhere, I'm calling Dale first.
Can you speak to why OWEB staff hasn't participated in, say, a collaborative conversation to date? What is the thought behind
Actually, I wouldn't say that that's true. So, as the Willamette started, we had Roger Wood was on staff and was helping the implementers develop the Willamette piece. Melissa Leone and Ken Beerley were intensively down in the Klamath as that one was being developed. Ken and Rick Krager were in the Deschutes as that one was being developed, whole watersheds. So what I would say is I don't think it's been so when you go down the road into the future, the Willamette is a funder-driven initiative initially, back in 2008. And so the funders, it was driven in a different way than the Deschutes was driven, but staff were always at the table. The question we have here is, to make that very transparent and consistent across the board, what should it look like? So staff have been very involved. It's just been different in every single case, in every way. Is that
Yes, that's good information. I would love to hear more, but I won't take up
Okay.
the time. You know, like how has it looked different across the state, and is that just based on staff personalities, or has OWEB ever said this is defined that this is the way we want our staff to interact collaboratively across the state, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the point where we're at now. We've had these amazing and absolutely amazing pilots across the state of the Willamette, Klamath, Deschutes, whole watersheds that have each evolved very differently. And so now we're at this point of maturity of saying, okay, those started 2007, 8, and 10. So what have we learned, and what does it look like moving forward? Because, you know, we didn't. You didn't want to necessarily fully define the thing and say we're not going to invest a penny until we have this thing defined. So, you know, I think the board and staff and partners said, let's get in there and invest and then learn as we go. And we're now at that point of saying, okay, what have we learned, and how does it look not just for current folks but for new ones going forward? What does that look like? So we'd love feedback on that. And you have it.
You know,
we want to get it up there.
And collaboratively developing those priorities, I think, is key to success in the long term. And no matter where, you know, through that process, there needs to be transparent, and there needs to be opportunity for anybody who's interested to engage in that process.
Okay, good, good.
May I add something to your list?
Yeah.
Okay. Timeline. You know, collaboration. We like to talk about collaboration, and over my years of experience in this field, what I've learned is collaboration takes a lot of time if you do it really well. And so I don't want to ding this process, but if you look at the timeline, you know, they're big questions, they're complex, that's very involved, and to really have a thorough collaborative process, you need time for that. And so just adding more time, adequate time, to interacting, or adequate time for these collaborative processes to occur.
Good. Okay.
And I'll add to that.
Wrap up?
I mean,
Okay.
Failing to take the time to do it can be a real problem.
Okay, good.
But I think there was general consensus across all of the discussions that we're trying to do more with less. And we're asking all of you to do more with less as well. And we want to make sure that we don't spread ourselves too thin. But I'm going to step back and not comment particular on each of the discussions. But I think the thing that I heard throughout consistently were a few things, is that whatever we do, it needs to be strategic. And we need to tie it to our goals, to our mission, and to data to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're actually being effective and efficient with the money that we're spending and how we're spending it and how we're spending our time. The other thing that we heard consistently around the discussions is that it needs to be collaborative. We can't do it alone, so to leverage our partnerships, leverage our funding, leverage our shared mission and goals as much as possible, be it with conservation financing, innovation, other areas of ways to look at how we can take OWEB's dollars and make them go further for everybody to help achieve what we're doing. So I think that the strategic, collaborative needs to be flexible. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all in all cases, so we want to make sure that we're not missing issues or points. And with the flexibility, we want to make sure that there's room for innovation too, be it with the small grants, be it with what we're trying to do more strategically, or even some of the other areas. So I think having the flexibility and having the innovation is something that's really important. I guess the other things too, just that would streamline, again, we're trying to be efficient, effective, and we want to make sure that there's some transparency as well. So everybody shares the information, shares the goals, and we can leverage that to the greater good. So that was, I think, my main things. Hopefully I captured everything effectively, and I pass it to Tom.
Well, thank you, Morgan. So Morgan covered a lot of really good points, and I'm, you know, we're about ready to head out the door, and what I want to focus on is just my extending my thanks to you, all of you, for your participation today. Walking around listening to the conversations was really exciting for me. You know, I'm definitely an OWEB geek when it comes to this stuff, but I'm very impressed. There were a lot of very insightful, thoughtful comments, very constructive, questioning. That's totally right on. We value questions about the things that we're considering. We need your input, and I just thought it was excellent, and I appreciate your time very, very much. I think it's going to inform us as a staff and our board as we move forward. And I noticed the folks online were typing away, and there's a whole bookload of text messages from them, and I'm confident that those are going to be insightful and helpful for our cause as well. So I'm really excited about this. You know, we're going to be on the road next week to other parts of the state. Looking forward to being able to talk with folks there and hear their ideas as well. We have choices to make. We do, one way or the other, and I think that the process that we've been in and the conversations that we've had with all of you through these listening sessions have been invaluable to us to help us ground truth some of our thinking, to get new ideas, and to help us be in the best position to be making strategic choices as we prioritize our funding decisions down the road. So thank you so much again for your time today. I know it's a big commitment of your day, and really glad you were able to be here. So I don't know if Lori has some wind up on this.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps just in terms of what happens when, just so there's some clarity on that. And I again want to echo the thanks. It's just always very invigorating to hear you guys because you think and care so deeply about this and you have such good thoughts. I think there's going to be a lot of information again for the board to consider once we finish these listening sessions next week. And what I wanted to talk about is, again, next Thursday is our last one. After that one, we're going to have a SurveyMonkey that goes up for 2 weeks, so people can do an online. It'll have the same questions that you talked about today. So again, please publicize that for people that weren't able to come. There's also our March board meeting. It's in Salem. So there's this topic will be on the agenda. We will do a verbal overview of the listening sessions because we will not have a report by then. And we'll talk, and certainly the board members who are able to attend will speak to their experiences and what they heard, and hopefully the rest of the board can learn from that. There will be a public comment opportunity on that day for folks if they want to come and speak to the board. The report of all these listening sessions will be done in April. And before the June board meeting is when the board takes up this topic and makes a decision. They plan to make a decision on the proposed direction. And before that time, our executive committee will be meeting because they've been really the key members of our board who are driving this whole effort. And so we'll be meeting with them to, again, take your feedback and figure out how they're going to use that information going forward. And I heard some comments at one of the sessions here about, you know, the need to take the time to collaborate. And that's exactly true. I mean, it takes time to listen. It takes time to talk together and come to the best result that we can at the time, knowing that we can always learn over time from how we've worked things out. And this process is, once the board decides on a direction, there are going to be other conversations about some of the details based on what the board says they want to move forward with. So nothing is going to be decided on and set in stone as far as implementation details at June. It will all follow then from the board's direction at the June board meeting. So there will be further conversations with folks that want to be part of that. And as a last comment, if you have any thoughts about this meeting, we have the green evaluation sheets that you could fill in and hand in to us so that we can make sure we're thinking about ways to make these meetings better. So thanks very much. Any questions or comments? Yes, Eve.
I just want to say thank you for opening the discussion up to your grantees and partners around the state. I think it's a valuable opportunity to begin to collaborate in this way, and I really appreciate that you have opened the discussion up, and I'm just grateful.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the folks online. Have a good evening.